All right. Well, we do have our first theist caller, Adam from England, and I believe this is right up your alley there, Mark, for conversation wise. What's up there, Adam? How you doing?
Hi there, Mark and John.
Hi, Adam.
Hi.
Yeah, I called in to present an argument I have for God on the basis of design.
Okay. Yeah.
Well,
shoot.
Okay. Well, my argument makes a note that the structure of mathematics is the same as the structure of a mind. So bounded values from infinite sets, and minds select information in the same way. To see that the universe is designed, you need a model where design is the relationship between mind and information. It also has to establish what kind of information physical mechanisms can output, in contrast to the kind of information that minds can output. So if the laws of the universe consist of specified information, then the kind that's the kind that can only be generated from an infinite set. Then this implies that the function responsible is one that doesn't have constraint, which is what free will is. So this in turn would imply that the universe is the output of a mind, because it's the only, it implies a function that isn't constrained by anything. As such, design is a function by which minds generate information.
So are you saying that the universe... Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Mark.
Just with free will, that would only sort of apply to somebody who's not a determinist, right? So if we're determinists, we'd disagree that you have free will at all. I'm not a determinist per se, but I don't know if we have free will or whether we don't.
Okay. Do you recognize that that our minds can generate an infinite set?
What do you mean by that? I don't think we can generate an infinite set. I think we can understand the concept of infinity, but I don't think I can count to infinite. Can you count to infinity?
What I'm basically asking is if your mind can represent the relationship between an infinite set and other facts, for example.
Yes, but that's a conceptual thing. Like we can't really, like, it's like paradoxes, right? Paradoxes can't exist in math or the real world. We can't have a paradox. But I can say this statement is a lie, and it's a paradox. It cannot be resolved. So conceptually, we can understand these things, but I don't think we could either A, visualize them, or B, have a sort of mental structure that accurately represents them.
Okay, I mean, what I'm kind of asking is, like, if we have access to it, because if you can basically take any
Do we have
numbers
access
and
to
you can
infinity?
recombine. Pardon me?
Do we have access to infinity? I mean, we can mathematically depict it conceptually, but that doesn't mean we have sort of access to it in reality. I think you're sort of thinking of things in your in mental constructs. Like, for instance, if I say I can conceptualize a married bachelor, right?
Well, that's just a contradiction.
Well, yeah, it's a paradox, but I can still conceptualize it, or else we wouldn't be talking about it.
Right, but I mean, you can conceptualize a sentence, but it doesn't mean anything. But infinity does have a meaning.
What meaning?
Well, yes, but I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
Well, I was just asking. Like, I'm wondering, like, what meaning could are you trying to attribute to it? Because I don't know. Maybe I'm just some dumb redneck here in Alabama, but I really don't know what any of this has to do with God existing or God's design. Because the way that I see design and the design argument is that basically you're specially pleading that God has to exist because you think that the world is designed. I don't think that you can actually distinguish between designed objects and undesigned objects. Like, in your worldview, are there any undesigned objects?
Okay. Well, those two questions there. So one was like how I'm so-called special pleading to God, like on the basis of design. No, it's like what you need to begin with is a model which basically expresses certain relationships. So the relationship that's important is mind and information. So we don't begin with the presumption that everything is designed. That's more like
Well, hold on. If I can pause you real quick, because I know that this is a big problem for a lot of creationists out there. Can you define information?
Yeah. So it's information is a true or false distinction from within a set of values.
A true or false distinction between in a set of values. How does that connect to like reality? Like when I look at a plant, what information am I taking in that is a true statement from a set of values?
Well, you're seeing, obviously you have like a visual scene, and what you're noticing is the boundary of the plant. So you're noticing the part that is the plant and the part that is not the plant. So you're making a distinction between sort of like X versus not X. So it's not X would be the environment of the plant, whereas X would be the plant itself.
So Adam, it sounds
you see,
like
I would have gone with color. Sorry, well, Mark, you go ahead.
Yeah, I've sort of heard this before, and this sort of definition of information we could apply to, say, the pulsings of a pulsar star, right? Like it is giving us some sort of data about the star itself. We can tell a lot about its life cycle and things like that. And if you want to say, hey, that's information, which I would probably define it myself as data, just raw information about the world around us. That's true, but it doesn't require a mind in order to generate that. So I'm wondering how you get to that information is being generated by a mind under your definition of information.
Okay. Yeah, so basically the key relationship is between bounded values and infinite sets. So when you have a bounded value, that's analogous here. What's an example of specified information? Because a bounded value.
Okay.
So for example, like a bounded value. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Adam. I just got one question. What infinite sets do you see in reality, like in actual reality around us?
When you say actual reality around it, you're talking about physical matter.
Yeah.
No, you don't see it there. This is like the relationship, right? So what it's saying is that reality is generated from something which is infinite, and it's what you get is a subset, and the subset is a bounded set. It's got a limit on one end, limit on the other. So if you like, if you imagine like one is less than X is less than 3. If X is an integer, then X is 2. Right? So you've got this bounding. In mathematics, you have a bounding from infinity to a given set. And what I'm saying is that so because minds can represent an infinite number of characters or values, when we have thoughts, what we're doing is we're selecting a subset of that infinity, and this is design.
Well, here's the problem, Adam. The problem is that while we can conceptualize infinity, I can't hold an infinite amount of integers in my head. And like you said, you can't count to infinity. So we can't hold an infinite set of values in our head. We can conceptualize the idea of things that can't exist in reality, like a married bachelor. We can conceptualize that, but we don't see it in reality. Just like we can conceptualize infinity, but we can't count to infinity in our head, and we don't see it in reality. So whether or not we can conceptualize a God, I'm not arguing that. What I want to know is whether that God actually exists in reality. And the idea that we can sort of conceptualize infinity and then we can represent that in mathematics, which is really a language, it doesn't actually get to whether God exists in reality for me. You've got to have more than that.
Okay. I mean, I agree that we lack the cognitive workspace to just represent an infinite number of characters or numbers in our heads. The thing is that what infinity is, and that's the reason why we can understand it. Right. So if we can't represent it in our minds all at once, then we have to start asking, well, how is it that we know any facts about about infinity? The reason is because infinity is a product of, well, our understanding of infinity is a product of the relations that distribute over mathematical sets. So the point is that you can take any two numbers, and you can produce any other number from them using the mathematical relations. So you can take any two numbers and multiply them to get any number of any size. So that's the form that infinity is taking. And it's similar with semantics as well. I mean, when we look at human language, if you just imagine like a Japanese character, there's no particular reason why that character should mean whatever it does mean in the Japanese language. And same goes for our alphabet.
Oh.
We can just imagine a number, like an infinite number of different characters, and we can just assign an infinite number of meanings to them. So what I'm kind of saying is that the mind has this ability to represent.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, all of those are very subjective and human-defined things. I feel like your argument must entail God being detectable in the natural world. How is God detectable in the natural world?
Okay, well, I mean, so if God is omnipresent, and I'm going to attribute the triomni attributes to God. It's kind of like saying how, if you imagine how is like asking, like how the rules of a mathematical set detectable within the elements of the set. The truth is you can't see the rules. The rules are invisible, but they're omnipresent. They're always there. So what I'm saying is that everything that we see is some kind of image of God. And again, I'm going to bring it back to the kind of design relationship that I said earlier, is that what you have in a mind is an infinite potential. And through that infinite potential, it applies a function, and the function bounds the output. So the output has like a bounded existence. And this is what we see when we look around us. We see objects with boundaries that are distinguishable from their environment. What I'm saying is that they're all a product of God's thoughts, God's rules.
Okay,
that?
So yeah. Well, one, how do you know that? But two, it seems like my earlier question of how can you distinguish between designed objects and undesigned objects? You're just saying everything's designed by God.
Right. So I think, as to the second question, how do I distinguish between undesigned objects? Well, when it comes to things that are independent of human beings, so objects that are there independent of us, of course, I think that everything's designed, because it's all there's a level of determinism that is applicable once you have things like laws of physics. Once you've got laws of physics, you've got the input energy. Everything is a product of input and output functions that God has designed, on my view. But when it comes to the human side, obviously I believe that we have free will. I believe that we are images of God, and obviously accidents happen. Right? There's such a thing as irrationality. We make mistakes. If a person makes a mistake or has an accident, what that means is that a person had a plan or a design, and they just took a wrong step or something. That's not designed. So on our side of things, on our side of the interaction, things might not be designed. Accidents aren't designed, and so on. But ultimately, everything that exists independently of human beings is an example of this kind of information that I'm talking about. This specified information that fits into like a specific kind of mathematical structure.
If there are undesigned things that things that God can't control, does that mean that God is not all powerful, which violates one of your omni properties?
I wouldn't say that it's something that God can't control. It's rather that God allows us to have our own input. Like he allows us to. He gives us our own authenticity over certain things. I mean, if we're just robots,
if our reality is designed by God, then wouldn't God like apply His design across reality? Like it seems to be, Mark, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe you can help me with this, but it seems like that seems to be an internal contradiction for his theology here.
Yeah, and omniscience also is a massive problem. Like if God knows that in 5 minutes' time I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, for instance, is there any way that could be different?
Is there any way that could be different? I mean, you could. So your decision process from now when you start at the computer to you drink the coffee, each decision
Yes.
is your own. It's just the fact that God has already seen ahead that you are going to make that decision. I mean,
But
your
I can't
level,
change my mind.
your own local.
And God can't control our decision, right?
He chooses not to.
How do you know that he chooses
could turn
not
you into a
to?
robot.
How do you know that he could turn us into a robot?
Well, I mean, he could just whatever function it is in your mind. Obviously, I believe that it's in your soul. That is freely generative. The part that doesn't have any constraint, your free will, in other words. I mean, he could just remove that. I mean, he could just make it so that your body just operates autonomously and according to just physical laws and stuff. I mean,
like, is there any instance in reality where God has done that?
Of course, no. But
then how do we know that he can? How do we know that he even can? Like, if it's never happened before, then how do we know that God can remove that?
Well, I mean, knowing that he can. We're taking as a background assumption theism itself, right? So you're kind of accepting. This is like an internal critique, right? You're just accepting whatever it is we think, and saying how can that happen? Well, of course, the reason why it wouldn't happen is just for the sake of consistency, right? God is going to want the world to be consistent. It's not going to be like just random stuff happening, because that would just encourage people to not take reality seriously. But when you're saying can he remove it, though, well, the functions are the structure of people's minds is also designed by him, so he could just remove any particular aspect of it. I mean, he's the one that's holding it in existence.
What do you mean by holding? I think from sort of what I'm hearing is that just the idea that we can conceptualize things so that a God must exist in reality, kind of thing. That's really what I'm getting from you, Adam. And I really want to push back against this idea of just because you can conceptualize something, it must exist. So the very idea that just because infinity exists in mathematics, we conceptualized it and put it in as a function in mathematics. What I want to know is whether God exists in reality, because I believe, probably quite rightly, that I can have all these concepts in my mind. I can make things up in my mind that don't enter reality. Like, for instance, I can hold a concept of a magical stone called a Blarney stone that does magic in my mind, but that doesn't actually exist in reality. And sort of the idea that, okay, well, infinity is a conceptual thing in mathematics, therefore there must be something providing the infinite. You haven't given an accounting for any other possibility, like a infinitely magical Blarney stone, for instance. You're sort of starting with a God must exist and then working backwards to accommodate it, using sort of maths and these conceptual things. But it really does sound like you're just trying to define a God into existence as being the author of things that are conceptually unlimited.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of things to say in response to that. So one is that obviously it sounds like what you're asking me is kind of like what provides the soundness of the account. So the account might be valid, but it might, right, but you don't see what is sound about it. Yeah, yeah. The other thing is to do with like any
Sorry
sound
to interrupt
account
you,
that we can
Adam.
provide.
So sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make a distinction for the audience, and maybe if John doesn't know, the validity is whether it's logical, like logically valid, like it logically follows. And I don't have a problem with that. Just like the Blarney Stone, there's nothing against logic in that. Soundness is whether it is actually true, and really we're looking for evidence that it's true. So yes, the soundness. And sorry, Adam, I just want to make that distinction in case people didn't understand the difference.
It's fine.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, yeah, if we're going to provide, when we have to provide an account for something, and when we're basically analyzing information from the world, this concept becomes important, called modeling, right? So, obviously, the three of us are going to agree on what we can see on the reality that we share, but our models might be completely different. So we might have completely different definitions of information, for example. And so this is kind of the reason why I gave the introduction that I did, where I talked about specified information. That was me kind of explaining my model. And so the model it intends to consistently interpret the relationship between mind and information. So basically, like I said, it's modeled on math. So a mind is a thing that can have an infinite set, or shall I say, represent at certain times, or represent an infinite set. The information are bounded values, and the function. So in mathematics, you have functions that go from one set to another. The function would be design. And so that kind of the intent is to create a consistent account of what design would be. And so that's kind of like that has to be the overarching framework for any evidence that we see in the world that we then interpret. And so what provides the soundness would be observing that there are objective laws in the universe that are responsible for interactions, forces that reconfigure the matter and energy. Obviously, we can describe those laws in our own way, but ultimately, to have a successful description, those descriptions have to actually correspond to the forces. They can't just be nonsense. They can't just be made up. So the specified information aspect would be things like energy matter equivalence. So like E equals mc squared. Right? So that's I would say that is a form of specified information because it has a value and it's distinct. And I would say that is the indicator of the existence of God. But you have to accept the model first. So if you had a problem with the model, you'd be able to object.
Yeah, I do have a problem with the model. I really see you're not bridging the gap between what we have in our mind. Like, because don't get me wrong, I totally agree that the universe has physical properties that we describe in the laws of physics, right? That's what you're talking about, essentially. And these descriptions may be inaccurate, or they may be more accurate. Like, for instance, Newtonian gravity, Einsteinian model is way more accurate. I get what you're saying there, but I don't understand how you bridge the gap between something we have conceptually and something that actually exists in the real world. Because it sounds like to me that your idea of specified information and therefore a mind is just anything in reality, any kind of data we can glean from reality. And I think that you have not bridged that gap between sort of the information that we have conceptually and information that we gather from the world around us being somehow indicative of a mind. You haven't shown that to be the case. All that you've shown is that the universe has certain physical properties that we evaluate and make models of. That's all you've shown. And I agree with that. But you need to show that these physical properties of the universe are actually coming from a God and not a magical Blarney Stone, or not just properties that are inherent to at the formation of the universe, whatever may have caused that.
So Adam,
Okay.
well, we do need to move on to our next guest that we have. So I'm going to let you say your piece, and then we're going to have to disconnect. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah,
though.
so I mean,
thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you too. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, bridging the gap requires a model because it's a model that provides correspondence. So when you have a correspondence, you have a subjective language and you have an objective language, an objective structure. So like a topology. And so obviously the universe would be the topology, and the subjective language would be, the way in which we talk about information and so on. And so, yeah, I mean, so the question is whether or not the model is consistent. And so, I mean, I hope I've provided a convincing reason to think that the model accurately represents the way that minds work and the way that math works. And once we plug the facts in from the physical universe, I hope that the inference becomes clear, that we can reason that the starting conditions of the universe, the laws of the universe, laws of physics, are the product of a mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to agree with that. And honestly, it sounds like a whole bunch of Jordan Peterson bullshit to me, but that's why I have Mark here. But thank you so much, Adam, for your call and your argument here. And we're probably going to have a little bit more exposition, but we appreciate your call and can't wait to have you again.
Thanks, Adam.
All right. Mark, I'm so glad that I had you on tonight for that call, because honestly, when people start in with the Jordan Peterson philosophical bullshit, like, I don't know, my mind tunes out. I don't know if I have this strange suspicion that I do have like ADHD and some kind of neurodivergency, but like, I don't know, I just sort of tune out when it comes to that kind of stuff. And it's like, you're just adding a whole bunch of word salad onto these concepts that are only meant to confuse people. I don't know. What do you think about that take?
I think that sort of the stretch for me is that it has to be an intelligence because we are getting some kind of information from the universe. Like I don't see why that has to be the case. And I have this example of the Blarney stone. So a magical stone can do anything, can create the universe, but it has no mind. It's just magical. So when you have these properties of can do anything, of course it can account for absolutely anything because it can do everything. So I don't even know, and I must admit I'm not a mathematician of any kind, but I don't even know if infinity can actually exist in the real world. I don't know that's even possible, because we sort of represent it in maths, but we don't see any examples of it. We can't. How do you tell if something's infinite? Well, you start to follow it, and when it doesn't end, there's a problem there, isn't there? Because it's never going to end for you to say, hey, that is then infinite.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a minor in math, and I know that we work a lot with infinities in math, and we usually calculate the values of something as it approaches infinity. And I
Right.
don't see anything in reality that prevents an infinity from existing. And so,
Right.
like, just simply saying that infinities can't exist or something like that, I feel like is not supported by, like, anything that you can actually prove. Now, that doesn't mean that infinities are proven in the same way of like other things that we have proofs for. It's more like, well, we can't prove that they don't exist, and they are very necessary in our understanding of mathematics and reality, like calculating things out to infinity and everything like that. So, I mean, like, they're very useful, and there's nothing that says that they can't exist, kind of situation, if you catch my drift there.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. I'm sort of saying I don't know that they can exist, but they very well could. But what makes an infinite automatically a god is that is the leap that I'm not getting.